wives and mothers. And the title of this message is Raising Young Ladies. Raising Young Ladies. And the reason I had Brother Austin read from that text right there, 2 Peter 3 is a great chapter 2, but that's not the one that I wanted. I wanted this one because in verse 6 it talks about Sarah, after mentioning all these things, an ornament of a meek and quiet spirit. It says in the sight of God it's a great price. And then it talks about the holy women, and then it says, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, and it gives us that. And here's an interesting thing that I just found out while I was studying for this, but the Hebrew word, lady, if you know, the same word that's used in the Old Testament for lady is Sarah. That's what Sarah means. And so if you look that up, and by definition, you know, what does Sarah's name mean? It'll tell you in Hebrew that it means a noble woman. Okay, and something along those lines, and that's what the word lady means. Okay, now I tried to think about how exactly to title the message and where I was going with that, because I didn't know what the proper way to say it is. There are several things that we call a lady. Okay, not really a lady, but you have to wait to the message. Okay, I get a little further in the message. One is woman. Okay. Let me quote Kamala Harris. She said, all mankind, and then she said, and womankind. Right? There seems to be a trend going on in our country. Like nobody can say, who was that guy that he said amen, and then he just didn't even feel right about that. He said, how did it say a woman? Right? It's just retarded, because it just shows that they have no idea what that means. Okay, the word woman is kind of shows how it's taken from that word man. And mankind just simply means human. Okay, and so, yes, man was called, in the sense of how that all plays out in Genesis, man is man because he's the first one, he's the first human. Okay, and then he says that she shall be called woman because she is taken of the man. I think that's Genesis 2. And so there's this idea that it's all one. Remember, he said God created man, and he created him, male and female created he them. All right, so this idea of man or mankind is talking about humans, okay, humans and humans. See, it just gets real ridiculous because, and it all has to do with feminism and this like fear of offending somebody and all that. But it's silly, okay? And actually, it's the same thing with female. What's it? Male. What is the opposite? Yeah, what can you do with that? Female. I mean, you're saying anyway. So it's the same thing. It has to do with the relationship that she has to mankind. But first it was man, and then it was woman. First it was the male, and then it was the female added to human race, the humankind after he was born. So anyway, I think everybody here probably understands that. And so therefore, rather than referring to a particular type of woman as just the common name woman or the common name female, doesn't that really seem to call that female? Seems really kind of disrespectful, doesn't it? It's kind of like an animal, just female, and it's not. It's okay to call them that, but it just seems like it wouldn't do that. Or even woman now is derogatory to some extent. So whereas when you read in the Bible where Jesus called his mom woman, you just kind of, that was rude, right? Calling her woman. Well, she is a woman. It's just like what would you rather him say, hey you, or whatever. So it's just that was just the way that they talked back then. So when we say though lady, what we're saying is we want to raise our daughters differently than just the common woman. Okay, just the average woman out there. No, we want as Christians to raise ladies. And again, as I've said, when you look up lady in the Bible, every time the word lady or ladies is used, it has to do with a position of nobility. Okay, and so I'm going to give you an example here. Look at Esther chapter 1. It's actually used, it's not used very often in the Bible, this word lady. Esther 1. Job, Psalms, Proverbs. Esther 1, look at verse 18. It says, likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. So we're not going to get into the context of that, but you see he's addressing their nobility, the ladies, as they're related to these kings, So somebody who's a queen would be called a lady. Somebody who's a princess would be called a lady. Somebody who's the mistress of the house, they're kind of like running things and they're in charge of things. In that position of authority, they would call them a lady. Okay, I'm talking about the way that it's used here in the King James. And so, rightly so, whenever we call somebody lady, we're talking about somebody who's more noble. Okay, but not necessarily somebody who is a queen or a princess, but really somebody who you would expect to be dignified. You would expect to carry themselves right and all that. Look at Isaiah 74, if you would. Now, this is kind of a poetic speech here. He's talking about a nation and referring to them as a lady, which is very common. And let me show you what he says, because in doing so, he begins to describe this person as a lady. And so go to Isaiah 47, and I'll start reading in verse 1. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans. For thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Right? Someone who was raised in this certain lifestyle, they have servants to do all that stuff for them. They say, no, you're going to get your hands dirty, you're going to get to do some work. Grind meal, uncover thy locks, let your hair down, make bare thy legs, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, O Holy One of Israel. Sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans. For thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. I was wroth with my people, I have polluted mine inheritance, and I have given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy upon the ancients, hast thou very heavily laid their yoke, and thou sayest, I shall be a lady forever, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it. So just real short explanation here. The children of Israel are going to go into captivity in Babylon, and for 70 years, and then afterwards, God is going to deal, this is dealing with his people. When they go into captivity, that's their punishment. Okay, so he actually talks about Nebuchadnezzar being his servant, and it's like it sounded like they're a good thing because of the fact that he's using them to conquer Israel and to take them captive, but it's for Israel's punishment. And then you can read about this in Ezekiel and other prophets as well as he talks about this. Now he's going to, and after that 70 years is up, now he's going to go back to turn to the Babylonians because they were wicked too. And he's like, now I'm going to deal with you. And he explains that. And so here he's addressing them and he's saying, hey, they're going to sit there and say, I'm going to be a lady forever. Talking about royalty, nobility, and they're going to, not have to do all these things. And then he says, hey, you're going to be actually brought down like the common woman and do all these kinds of things. Now, obviously, we don't believe when we say raising a lady, we don't believe we're talking about raising a woman who's never going to grind at the mill and have to go work out in the water and pull her skirt up and all these kinds of things. That's not, when we're talking about Christian young ladies, we're not talking about nobility, like they're not going to have to get their hands dirty, they're not going to have to work. We're talking about somebody who is set apart from the other just common woman. And they're on royalty, basically nobility in God's eyes. Does that make sense? So God sees them as ladies, as queens, as nobility. All right, there's only really one other context where the word lady is used. Go to 2 John. chapter 1. And this is a little controversial or debatable as to who this person is, or if it even is a person. Perhaps it's just talking about a church. But in 2 John chapter 1, it's only one chapter, but the verse 1 says, "The elder unto the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all they that have known the truth." Now, most scholars, from what I understand, believe the elect lady was a literal person who was influential in the church, a lady. And, some have even tried to make that Mary, which I suppose to some degree would fit. We know Mary had children, and so that would be true. And but some of the rest of that chapter doesn't seem to really fit, like why he would be talking to her. I don't know. It could be that he's simply talking to Christians in general, or a church, and some people have tried to make that connection there. But regardless, what I'm trying to show you is that he's referencing this lady, okay? And it seems to be a term that is fitting to call a woman who is a child of God, okay? A lady, as distinguished from just the average, just the common woman. Again, I'm not talking about nobility like, looking down your nose at everybody else, or thinking that you're higher, that you don't have to do certain things. That's not what we mean. Okay, but to God, we know that what makes somebody prosperous, what makes somebody successful, what makes them noble, is completely different than what our world calls that. But I think it's very fitting that we do call them ladies. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with saying woman or female or whatever. But when we talk about raising young ladies, I think that's appropriate, because we're wanting to raise our ladies to be something that's different than what the world normally sees in a woman. And let me tell you this, the way we are in our society, and I don't think it's anything new, I think it's been every generation from the beginning, but where we are in a society right now, we need young ladies who are set apart from the common woman. And who's going to do it, other than Christians who are set apart. A lot of Christians, no difference between them and the world, but it's going to take a certain type. Well, that's what the sermon is about. Okay, so let me just put it this way. If we're going to raise Christian ladies who have some higher standards of righteousness and conviction than the average woman, what's it going to take? I'll give you 3 points here. Number one, it's going to require older women who can teach the younger women to be ladies. That might sound very elementary, like that's nothing new. But I'm going to tell you the importance of it, because number one, I as a pastor, I can't really teach younger women. Now, I can preach the Bible to anybody, okay, but there are certain things that I can't really do to address a woman. Now, people have tried, but at some points I believe it even gets inappropriate for a man to call out a certain thing that a woman's doing or the way she's dressing. Somebody recently sent me something, and it was funny the way they approached it. They sent an email and they said they were kind of trying to trick me. Okay, first of all, I have no loyalty to Jack Hyles, because until like the last couple of years, last maybe 5 years, I really didn't know hardly anything about Jack Hyles. I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying I didn't know who he was. Okay, but a lot of independent Baptists are big, Jack Hyles. And so somebody sent me something, and he wasn't being mean, he was just trying to make a point. And he and I are on the same page on this, but so he sent me something that said, hey, the Southern Baptists are getting so bad. And they said, you know what, there was this pastor who said, who called a woman up there on the platform, and then he said, he gave this quote, I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something like, lots of guys probably look at you and want to touch you and saying these kinds of things. I don't know the context of the message, but this guy was looking at the woman and saying, well, I'm sure lots of guys want to touch you, and I can understand why, and all these things, which sounded very, very creepy. And he said, what would you do? And I kind of smelled like, hey, somebody, I think he's trying to trick me or something like that. And I said, well, to me, I need to know a little more context for one thing. I said, but this definitely sounds creepy, and it sounds like something that needs to be investigated. Like, you never want a pastor to really talk to a girl that way. But hey, I'm sure all the guys want to touch you, that's pretty creepy. Okay, and this kind of stuff goes on sometimes where somebody just starts looking like a dirty old man because he's talking about how pretty the woman is, or something like that. Or even sometimes when a preacher gets up and starts just talking about how women, you need to stop attracting guys by doing this and dressing this way or that. And it's just, I don't know, it just gets to this point where it's uncomfortable. It's like, man, why don't you just preach the Bible and just not mention that you're a weak man who has a problem looking at women? Okay. But anyway, long story short, the guy posted the clip of it, and it was actually Jack Hiles who said that. He called a young lady up, and he did that. And so obviously the point that he was making is like, wasn't Jack Hiles a creepy person? And I said, yeah, I mean, yes, that bothers me, and yes, that's creepy. I don't know the context. The guy's dead. Why bring it up and make a big deal about it? I don't understand exactly what that helps. However, if I saw a preacher doing that nowadays, I would probably say, yeah, it needs to be addressed because it's kind of creepy. Okay, go ahead and go to. I'm going out of order. Hopefully, I'll remember. But let me go out of order here and go to Titus chapter 2. You don't know what the order is anyway, so. Titus chapter 2. Titus is what we would call maybe a preacher boy, a young preacher boy, and Paul's taking him along and teaching him, training him, and giving him some advice and some instructions as to what to do. And he even gives him the authority to go and to ordain elders and all this stuff on his behalf. And here's what he says. He's talking about all these people are going to come in and profess that they know God, but in works they deny him and all that. In chapter 2 he says, but speak thou the things which become sound doctrine. And then he talks about who he's going to tell what. Okay? That the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, and charity, and patience. Right? So he's like, preach this to the aged men. He says, preach this to the aged women, okay? That the aged women likewise, that they be in a behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. Then here's what he says, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. And then he skips over, young men. So he's like, tell the old men this. Tell the old women this. Tell the young men this. It's like, well, what about the young women? Well, he addresses them, but he says, tell the old women to teach the young women. Does that make sense? So it's like the one, what's the word I'm looking for? Demographic that the pastor is probably really not going to address and say a whole lot is directly to. Now, there's a lot of stuff we preach that's just generally to everybody, but I'm not going to specifically tell a lady how to be a lady. Why? Because I'm a man. I don't even know how women think and feel and do all these things. I can try to speculate, and I can bring up some verses, and I can maybe get in the ballpark. But the reality is, a lady is not going to know how to be a lady unless she has a woman who knows how to be a lady teaching her how to be a lady. Now, I can be a man, and I can teach a young man how to be a man, but I can't teach a young lady how to be a lady. We need older women to be able to do that. And here's what the older women are supposed to be able to teach. All right. Number one, he said, teach them to be discreet. I looked that up, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't know this, but the word discreet, the etymology of that English word means separated. Okay, it's exactly what we're talking about: being different than the common woman, coming out from among them and being separate. These women need to know how to be different from the common woman. How are they going to know that? Well, it's going to take a godly woman to teach them that. Okay, to be chaste. Now, chaste, obviously has to do with keeping themselves sexually pure and not falling into, fornication. Not, whenever they get married, obviously staying faithful and not. But I would go a step further and say that women need to learn. And the older women can teach them how to do this, how not to, even after they're married, to be flirtatious with other men or be involved in unhealthy relationships with other men. And this is all part of being chaste. Okay? How about young women who they're far from being married, and maybe they're not sexually active, but how can we maybe sometimes see young girls not knowing how to be chaste. Let me give you some examples. When you go, when you overhear somebody talking to a 4-year-old girl and saying, "You got a boyfriend yet?" 4 years old. I mean, we expect the public school and like the wickedness of the world, like they do some weird things, right? They're even encouraging, little boys to, well, maybe you're supposed to be a girl and all this. We know how weird the world is, right? But Christians don't ever ask a little 4-year-old girl if they got a boyfriend yet. So here's what will happen. I mean, I've seen this before. We've worked on bus routes. We've been around a lot of kids, and I know how the drill goes. You ask them, do you have a boyfriend yet? Yes. This is a 4-year-old girl. Who's your boyfriend? Johnny. Just making names up here, folks. Johnny. Oh, yeah. And then you see him like 3 days later, and you say, how's Johnny doing? Ew, gross. I don't like him anymore. I now like Frank. He's my boyfriend, right? You're like 4 years old. Okay, let's just 7 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old. I don't care. It's still wrong. And you know what you're teaching that child at a young age, and allowing them to be into boyfriend-girlfriend relationships at a young age. You know what you're teaching them? To give their heart to somebody that they're nowhere near being ready to get married to, and they're giving their heart to them. And slowly, it's getting easier and easier to know what it feels like to break up. You know what I mean? And then it's so easy for them now after they're married to be like, you know what? I just don't love this person. Like, and then they have all these like relationships in the past and people that they loved and gave their heart to into the past. And it's like, what you're doing is you're just teaching these girls to grow up and not be chaste and not be loyal to their husband and love their husband and all those things. So here's what it says: be discreet, be chaste, teach them to be keepers at home. That's a big thing that's lacking in our society today. Even though women, for the most part, I would say it's pretty standard that women tend to be the ones who are taking care of the house. Even if they're working a full-time job, they're coming home and it's kind of understood they're the ones that are going to make sure things are done. Or maybe they're yelling at the husband and wondering why he didn't do the dishes or something like that. I don't know. but somehow like they're taking initiative to make sure that work at home's done. But the Bible makes it clear that that's the woman's job. Take care. That's her. That's what she's good at. That's her skill set. You know what I mean? To be able to do that and to be able to keep the home. And you say, well, I just don't know. I know this situation or that situation. I'm just preaching you the Bible. And the Bible says that this is what the older ladies are supposed to teach the younger ladies. Okay. Now, perhaps there's a situation where the mother dies and a man is God forbid, trying to raise women, young ladies on his own, and he's going to have to learn how to do some things, teach them how to do some things. Look, that's an unfortunate situation that might happen. But for the most part, that should never have to be the case where the husband has to teach the daughter how to iron clothes or how to do the laundry or how to do dishes or something like that. It should just be understood. Hey, let your mom show you how to do that. She's good at it. And there's people that I know that would be just, oh, this is such a. But look, we are Christians and we are talking about raising godly young ladies and how that, by definition, is going to look different than the common women of this world. Okay, so this is what he's saying: to be good, to be obedient to husbands. Obedient to husbands. What are you talking about? I'm talking about being a young lady, a woman of God. Okay, so we need instruction. This is how we're going to be able to raise Christian ladies, because our society is really lacking good Christian ladies. Okay, and so how are we going to raise them? Well, we need older women to be able to teach them, and therefore, obviously, the best way to teach somebody is to demonstrate and to show and to set an example for them. It's one thing to give them a list of things like, this is what you're supposed to do, but if they don't see it in you, I'm talking to the older ladies now, if the young ladies don't see that in you, they're really not learning anything. You can teach them all day, hey, this is what you're going to be, and here's how you got to be obedient to your husband. Well, if you're not obedient to your husband, are they really going to learn that? They're not. They understand what they're supposed to do, but they're not going to learn it. So we need to be able to demonstrate. And every time we preach on women, we're going to have to go to this, which is Proverbs 31. But I believe that's there for a reason. This is the ideal virtuous woman. Lemuel's mother. Some have tried to say that Lemuel is another name, like a pen name for Solomon, and that this is talking about Bathsheba, his mother. I don't know. I just take Lemuel as a different person entirely, and that's why it's put here at the end of the chapter. At the end of the book. But here's what King Lemuel's mother says. Verse 10, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband does safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like a merchant ship. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field, and buyeth it with the fruit of her hands. She planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretcheth out her hands to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hand to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Now, obviously, this is an ideal of like the perfect role model of a woman. And I'm telling you, I can't even fathom the amount of work, and this isn't just me like talking bad about women, so now I got to get them back on my side, so let me say some nice things about them. No, that's not it. This is just honest, definitely all men can relate to this. What in the world could we do without women? I mean, how do things get done? Like the amount of things that, I was just thinking about the week, we went on vacation and had all these things I was preparing for, all these things I was getting ready. And then I'm thinking on top of this, we got to pack and get ready for camping. And I just remember just really thinking, it just like clicked. I was just like, man, my wife did a lot of this. Now my kids did a lot of this too, but that was my wife too. My wife made sure that the kids did it. She gave them jobs to do it. She delegated it. But I'm just saying, ultimately, I left everything in her hands, and I just knew, hey, it's going to get done. I'm going to come back, and she might say, sorry, I didn't pack your clothes. I didn't know what you needed. And I threw a couple things in a bag and said, let's go. All right? But she did so much for that. And every time I got this crazy idea for something I want to do in the church, and I'm just like, hey, we got to have this big thing, and we're going to have this meal, and every day we're going to have to do this, and we're going to do this, and I'm not really thinking about how big of a project that is. And next thing I know, she's getting out lists, and she's talking to people, and she's thinking this through, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, women have the ability, a God-given ability to be able to do a lot of these things. And I know not every woman is made up the exact same way. Different women are going to have different strengths in different areas, and it's the same as men. But this is giving us kind of like the ideal. It's like a model of what we're supposed to see and what we're supposed to go after. So, ladies, I mean, if you know somebody and they don't have that role model in their life, they don't have a mother to teach them. Maybe they don't go to a church where there are ladies that can teach them these things. Well, they at least have this, some examples in the Bible. And this right here where they can look at and they can say, okay, this is what a virtuous woman looks like. This is what a young lady is supposed to strive to be. Okay, so number one, it's going to require the older women who can teach and demonstrate to the ladies. Demonstrating is part of teaching. All right, number two, it's going to take separation from bad influences that would keep them from becoming ladies. All right, now this is a difficult one in our society, because people think, oh, you're holding the girls back and you're not allowing them to do this. I can't tell you how many times we kind of overheard either somebody got wind of somebody talking about this, or maybe we heard them with their own ears, like talking about how, I can't believe they don't let their daughter do this, and then there. She's not allowed to go here. And like, I just can't believe that. Okay? I don't care because I'm going to do what I think is best according to the Bible and what's best for my daughter and to raise her up to be a young lady. And part of her being a young lady means I've got to separate her from things that would stop her from being a young lady. Again, I can say the same thing about the men, but we've already dealt with men and how they got to work hard and they got to, learn how to love the woman and then take care of the weaker vessel and all these kinds of things that we need to teach the men. But the women are going to have to be able to learn how to, like I said, come out from the world. And this is why it bothers me. I'm trying to think of who's got little girls in here. Okay. Not that it would change my message, but sometimes you just got to think these things. This is why it bothers me when I see Christians and their little girls have on Elsa, the princess from Frozen, and they got them on their shirt, and they got the Frozen dolls. I think Elsa's the blonde-headed princess, and all the little kids, I guess. Okay. Not necessarily saying it's wrong to have watched that, but whenever that becomes like this child's just role model in a sense, like I have a problem with that because if you ever watched that movie, and if you didn't, like, good for you. But if you ever watched that movie, it's entertaining. But the thing that becomes kind of like the thing that got so big about that movie was the song. If you have seen it, you know what I'm talking about, where she breaks out in the song, "Let It Go." That song's so popular. Let it go. Don't hold it back anymore. And really the amount of feminist propaganda that was put into that. And the funny thing about the whole movie, we've talked about this several times in our family, but the thing about the movie is that attitude does her no good in the movie. Like if you really follow the moral of the story, her attitude and her going this way and trying to do all these things actually ends up being devastating to her whole life and to her family. But yet that becomes the mantra where everybody's like, oh, that's just such a good, let it go. And they got that all over their shirts and they just love this little lady who's just independent and just wants to, everybody know where I'm going? Like, I don't like that. I'm like, that shouldn't be a role model for a young girl. Because the idea is like, hey, my parents are holding me back and the world's got all these expectations of me, but I'm just going to do my own thing, and the cold never bothered me anyway, and what, all this. Yes, I could sing the song to you if I wanted to, but I don't want to. So anyway, that bothers me that the examples little girls have now are not good examples, not good role models. And who else are they going to look up? Movie stars, popular singers. I mean, these are the worst. I've seen clips here and there of little girls who go on American Idol or something like that, and they sing they got these beautiful voices, and they sing this sweet song, and it's just like, that was so sweet. And then they move them along to like the final stages and say, hey, you're going to be a star someday. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I hope they don't. Because you know what's going to happen. As soon as they get out there and they get publicity, and everyone's going to force them to start looking like trash and using their body to sell albums and stuff, and it's always devastating. It's always devastating. So then all these kids look at them and say, hey, that's my role model. I want to be like so-and-so. I want to sing like so-and-so. I want to dress like so-and-so. It's up to Christian families, particularly the men of the house, to say, no, you're not going to go that direction. You're not going to go that route. Okay, the world's going to teach you to be anything but a godly young lady. And it's our job to make sure that you learn how to stay away from that and be discreet, right? Be separate from them and be noble unto God and be a lady. The public schools, I've already made this known many times how I feel about the public schools. I know there's times where for whatever reason that has to be the case, and it certainly can be done. Somebody can be raised in a public school and still turn out all right. I'm not saying that they can't, but man, what a dangerous place to send your kids. And I think it's getting worse and worse every year in modern history. It's just it's nothing but a big agenda, and it seems like right now just totally pointed towards turning girls into anything but godly young ladies. And so here's another thing that I believe we need to keep them from as far as influences that would keep them from becoming young ladies And this is I'm in good company here, but I know a lot of people wouldn't like to hear this. And I've talked to a lot of Christians that get offended whenever I say this. But I'm going to tell you this, the workforce. The workforce can be devastating to a young lady. And when they go there, especially, they're just now, they got a license, they're growing up and they want responsibility. And so you say, okay, you know what, why don't you go get a job? And then you send them, and they've never been around boys and girls who expect girls to be a certain way and to act a certain way, to dress a certain way. And the pressure on them to be ungodly women of the world, females, is so strong. It's so strong. I can't tell you how many people I've seen lose their daughters and lose their, and I'm talking about godly, I'm talking about pastors, families, people that went to Bible college and, wanted to do great things for the Lord, and I look back and they lost their kids. A lot of times it was because of the influences that they allowed them to be around, and the public school maybe, or even going into the workforce. In fact, sometimes the workforce is worse than public school because you can be around just one or two people that can be way more influential than if you're just in a class full of a bunch of people with a teacher, kind of overseeing some of that. It's all dangerous. It's all dangerous. And part of raising our young ladies, raising Christian young ladies, I believe, is keeping them separate from bad influences. I know another thing that happens a lot in all those, it fits in with all the other things I just said, I guess, but I always think of Dinah, and we won't take the time to go there, but the story of Dinah, she goes out with the daughters of the land. Remember that? And basically, hey, can I go out with my friends? Well, sure, they seem like pretty good girls. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, that's not in the Bible. But it goes out with the daughters of the land, and somehow she meets this Dinah meets this prince of Shechem, and Shechem kind of like, sweeps her off of her feet, flatters her, and by the end of the story, it says that he defiled her. But when I read the story, it seems very clear that she was part of it. It wasn't like she was raped. She was just defiled because she's no longer a virgin. So what happened is the influence was there because here she's out there with the daughters of the land. They're being kids like kids are, and they're saying, hey, look at that handsome guy over there. Oh, he's checking you out. Oh, you should go talk to him. I'm really reading into the text, okay? but I think it's there. I think we can really get something from that. Next thing you know, man, it's just been a bad influence. And let me tell you this, when you let your daughters go out with other girls and go do what girls do, and I don't even know what that is, I don't want to know what that is. When you let them go what girls do, you're opening up a door for them to mess up that thing where they're no longer discreet, they're no longer chaste, and then they're just kind of like their heart is taken away from that objective of being that godly young lady, and they become just another woman of the world. Okay, the final thing is this, and this is important, and this is what all the young ladies need to hear this. The final thing is, it's going to take a willingness on the part of the young woman to be a lady, right? Because the truth of the matter is, dads can say, no, you're not going out there like that. No, you're not going with those people. No, you're not going to public school. No, you're not going to do that. And in your heart, you can still rebel and be like, well, whenever I'm 18, I'm out of here. Whenever I get out my own, I'm not going to abide by these rules or whatever. And there's nothing your parents can do about it, except hunt you down. And that's just the reality. And at some point, parents have to get to this point, as hard as it might be, and as devastating as it might be. Say, hey, that's too far gone. I'm not saying don't stop. I'm saying ever stop praying or ever stop trying to get them to be young ladies. But there is that time where you're like, you know what? They've gone the direction that they're going to be. It wasn't necessarily my fault. But I'll say this. Look at Proverbs 22, familiar passage of scripture, but we'll go ahead and read it. It is a whole lot easier, a whole lot more likely that a woman will want to be a young lady if they're trained right. Not saying it's 100%, but if they're trained right, it's more likely that they are going to desire that themselves. In verse 6 of Proverbs chapter 22, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, or she shall go. I sound kind of like now, or womankind. Or she shall go. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, I heard people take this to the extreme and be like, well, if they depart from it, then you didn't train them right, and it's your fault, because right here it says train them up, and they will, I believe this is just a general principle that's being said. I honestly do. Now, if you want to take it that literally, I mean, I'm not against that, but I believe it's just a principle he's saying. The principle is, if you train them right, you're going to be able to count on the fact that they're not going to depart from it because they've been trained right. Okay? But the reality is, it's still going to be up to the individual. They can grow up in a Christian home. They can get all the right teaching. They can be made to go to church. They can be, not allowed to go with bad influences. They can be put around godly influences and older ladies who demonstrate good, godly principles. Now, that sounds like a perfect world, and nobody's raised in a perfect world. You do understand, like, I'm saying all these things, like this is what we need to do, but the reality is there's all the influences are still going to get in there. They're going to watch movies, and they're going to get those influences. They're going to have some friends that you don't even know that they have, even church friends. And this is another thing about Sunday schools and different things like that. You never know who's whispering in their ear and who they're getting influences from. But the reality is, it's got to be a heart issue for them. Because the reality is, like I said, a young woman can still become a young lady without those influences. Many have done it. Many have had bad home situations and bad examples of what a woman should be, and yet they still came out as young ladies. And they could go to public school. I've seen a lot of people go through public school, come out, be young ladies. I've seen women that have to go to the workforce, and they work and they do the job and they do all that, sometimes 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and they come out and they're still young ladies. It is possible because they had a heart to do so. Okay, so all of these go together. You can't leave one undone. You got to do all these things, but the reality is ultimately it comes down to getting that young woman to have that desire to be a lady. And it's going to be so much easier if they see it and they're taught that and they're held, away from bad influence. But ultimately, it's going to come up with them. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you for the service and this part of the Scripture that we can go to. Certainly, anyone in here raising young ladies, I pray that you'll help us to be able to seek your word and to do the best of our ability to raise them for you and for their future husbands, and that they would be godly ladies. And I pray that you give us wisdom and help us to do that. Help the older ladies in here to be strong in the faith and to demonstrate the right behaviors, the right attitude that they might teach and be an example to the young ladies. And then I pray for our young ladies, Lord, work in their hearts and help them to desire to grow up to be good, godly women. And we will do the best we can to praise you with our lives and glorify you. And I pray you help us do that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.